So Les asked the question, what was I going to do with the readings? And I asked the question, which of those readings struck a chord with you? Which of the readings from Proverbs about wisdom, the reading from Mark, the reading from James, which one posed questions for you? Which one spoke to you and did God speak to you about? Which one did you think, I'm not quite sure I understand what that is saying? Which was the response? Now, normally we would, in church, take the opportunity to get some people to share, which we can't really do today. But I just invite you to think for a moment of what it was that you responded. Now, I'm just going to swap to Gal Review because I'm going to ask a question that you can put your hand up to. Don't need to say anything, but I just wanted to see, and I can't see everyone. I've only got 49 of you on the slide. I might go back one slide because that might see. Yep, okay. So the question is, I just want anyone to put up their hand if this question is, the answer to this question is yes for you. I'm just wondering whether anyone likes to be told that they've made a mistake and they've got it wrong, or to be told that you've done it the wrong way. Well, it's good to see that there are some enlightened people in our congregation, because it all depends, doesn't it, on what it is. I was saying at the start when we were talking before the service start that yesterday we had to reassemble a shelving unit that was we had to pull down to move it from one place to another. And you know, one of those shelving units where you've got all the bracket, all the right angles that go together, and you put the bracket across for the shelf, and then you put the shelf on top, and all the shelves should be level. We got it assembled and we found that it would start off on the right level on one side, and by the time we got round to the fourth side, it was higher than what it was. Something wasn't right. And it took us a little while to work out that of all the brackets for the 4 shelves, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shelves, whatever it was, that a number of them were slightly different because the holes were closer to the top than on the others. So we ended up having to go back and work out what had gone wrong. It would have been really helpful to have had some instructions that were probably long thrown away to actually work out why this had happened. So in that case, to tell someone, for someone to tell us how to do that and to tell us we've got it wrong would have been really helpful, and to show us where we'd gone wrong so we didn't have to just work it out for ourselves. And yet I can imagine there are other times where we think we've done something right, we've really worked hard to do it right, and when someone tells us we're wrong, our commitment to something like that is different than when we've just made a mistake and we realise it. So it does depend on what we've got invested in, whether we've done something wrong or not. So in the Proverbs reading, we have wisdom, which is another way of saying God's Spirit, God speaking to people, saying to them that God wants to give us wisdom and help us to know how to live. And if we do listen to God, then our lives will be much more full of all that God wants for us than if we don't. Because if we don't listen to God, we can make many more mistakes and end up finding life more difficult than what God would wish it to be for us. So those words might have rung true for some people. The words from James about the way that a tongue can actually cause great difficulty might ring true for times where we may have said something we wished we hadn't said, or someone had said something to us we wish they hadn't said. Or the words from James, for all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes is speaking in perfect and is able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. Most of us at least have made one or two mistakes in our lifetime. So maybe those words speak to us and remind us that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as we learn from those mistakes, as long as we listen for God helping us to understand and to not just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. What about the reading from Mark? The reading from Mark is about rebuke as well. But maybe we just, to understand the rebuke in Mark to Peter from Jesus, we need to understand a little bit of the context. In Mark's Gospel, this is the furthest that Jesus gets away from Jerusalem. He turns his face towards Jerusalem and makes the trip towards Jerusalem, where he has predicted that he would be crucified and that God would raise him and that things would be difficult, and that it calls on the disciples a number of times to be aware of that and to follow him. So there's a lot at stake in turning towards Jerusalem, in those words of heading towards Jerusalem. Peter often makes mistakes, doesn't he? Some theologians suggest that Peter actually is used as an example at times to help us to understand when we make mistakes. But Peter is not excluded from following Jesus having made these mistakes. And sometimes in the way that this passage is written, particularly when Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," it's not so easy to understand what Jesus is saying about Peter at this point. I found an article by Robin Whittaker talking about these passages of rebuke and call, is what she's saying, very helpful. Because one of the things he suggests in looking at these passages is that Peter fulfills a special role in the narrative because he's the one who falls. Remember in this story and the story where he denies Jesus before Jesus' death, so he's the one who falls. He is penitent. He says he's sorry. He is forgiven and he is restored. Reminding us of the importance and the model of discipleship within the community that Mark is writing to, that this is a model of relationship, model of discipleship. The discipleship is about learning and making mistakes and recognizing that, being sorry for our mistakes, accepting God's forgiveness and being restored. Now, how does this fit in with Jesus' rebuke of Peter and saying about Satan? The rebuke that Peter in turn, see, Jesus says he's going towards Jerusalem and Peter takes Jesus aside and rebukes him. So the rebuke back to Peter is one that reminds Peter that the role of disciple, and it's all in the name, disciple is the one who follows. For Peter to actually have rebuked Jesus for what Jesus has said, changed from the role of being the disciple to being the one who knows what God's wisdom is in this situation and what is meant to happen. He's saying to Jesus, you're going the wrong path. In turn, Jesus rebukes Peter. And these words of saying, get behind me, they're also the words that Jesus uses when people recognize who Jesus is. And Jesus says not to tell people, but to go back to where people were, or to go back if people have been healed to see the priests. So it's a word that is actually about, in going back and rebuking, it's words that are not as negative as what we might think. And Jesus is saying to Peter, get back behind me, get back and follow me, and recognizing that if we don't do this, then just as Satan is called the father of lies and he tries to deceive people, there's a danger that we're on the wrong track and that we tick up that role of deceiving people. So Jesus is telling Peter to get back behind me, get back into line, and to follow Jesus. Jesus' words are a rebuke, but they're also a recall, a reaffirmation of the call of Peter to follow Jesus and for Peter to adopt the correct posture of being a true disciple. We sometimes get things wrong. We sometimes think that, wonder what God is doing, and that wonder whether God's made a mistake in a number of different areas. But that's because we don't understand. And the readings today are reminding us that we need to listen for what God is saying to us. Listen to the wisdom. Look through the eyes of other people and listen to what God is saying to us through others. And sometimes it's the children's innocence and their awe and wonder can speak to us of what God is saying to us. The theme slide that I chose, we might need to go back one to find that. The theme slide is reminding us that to give heed to reproof. When God is teaching us something, give heed to that. And God says, I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make my words known to you. And you will have the life that I would wish for you. And move in that direction. May that be the desire of our heart this day as we follow in the direction that God is leading us and listen for what God is teaching us. And remembering that Jesus came and calls us to follow a path of service. And this is picked up in the song, From Heaven You Came, Helpless Babe.